Welcome back to Beauty Marks Podcast. I'm so excited for today's episode because it is the 25th episode with a special guest talking all about boundaries. So I'm talking with a mental health counselor about boundaries when it comes to families, relationships, and especially now coming with the holidays. I thought that this topic is so relevant. I actually got exposed to the topic of boundaries by actually reading a book by Henry Cloud called Boundaries. So let's just get right into it. Welcome to Beauty Marks Podcast.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yes, thank you for being a part. So can you share with our listeners a little bit about yourself, what you're passionate about?
Absolutely. So I am a registered mental health counselor intern, and that means I'm post-grad and I'm finishing up my requirements for state licensure in the next few weeks. Yay. And so I love working with clients that, of course, are dealing with anxiety and depression, but I also specialize in working in trauma, anywhere from PTSD to sexual traumas. And then I am specializing in working with teens and women in their identity, self-esteem, and self-worth.
Ooh, that's so good. I feel like and everybody knows on this podcast that I'm all about mental health and the importance of it. So today we're going to be talking about boundaries. And I know that's something that's very important. And I know my own mental health counselor has talked to me through that. And I actually read a book on that. So I wanted to talk to you and get kind of more like, what is boundaries?
Ooh, okay. So this is one of my favorite topics to have with my clients because it doesn't matter what they're coming in for. The topic of boundaries always comes up because I always feel like it's very much an important coping strategy, but also very important for us to know what we're okay with and what we're not okay with. And so the book that you're talking about, Boundaries, right? It's like the book that all of us, it's like our go-to book. And so when we're talking about boundaries, one of the first things that I always tell people is the simplest way to describe it is it's the limits or the rules that you put on yourself and on others. In the book Boundaries by Dr. Henry Cloud, he talks about it. He talks about how, you have to be able to identify what's you and what's not you. Mm-hmm. And then also being able to know where you end and someone else begins. And so that's always been a powerful thing that I discuss with clients, because I feel that if we're not careful, culturally and society, we'll find ourselves kind of just allowing others to dictate what our lives look like. And so then we have these unhealthy boundaries coming in.
Mm-hmm. That's so true. Something that we talked about before this whole podcast was about being raised in church and the boundaries that are placed, and how a lot of people don't know what boundaries are or think that it's, or get offended by you putting a boundary. So how, can you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. It's so interesting. Since the pandemic, church hurt has been coming up more in sessions. And so when we're in church, obviously we are submitting to an authority, our leadership, and then those of us who are in leadership, we're submitting to the pastor or the apostle, depending on the church dynamics. And so because we're Christians, there's this misinterpretation that the expectations have to be where we're just we're overworking ourselves. And so burnout happens a lot. And also when something isn't correct, when something is going against what God is showing you, because there's the spirit of discernment, then it's okay for us to tell someone, I'm not okay with this. I don't feel like this is what God is asking of me. And being able to put that firm boundary, because oftentimes people believe that that firm boundary is being aggressive about it, and it's being assertive about it, right? And there's that difference, that's a fine line. And so in church is knowing yourself and knowing what your limitations are, right? And being able to say, no, this isn't okay. And when the expectations are overwhelming you, or the expectations are trying to define you or change who you are, the person that God has created you to be, then it's okay for you to say, hey, this isn't okay. This is hurting me instead of helping me. This isn't edifying my spirit. And so that is an area that I really help, because I've gone through it. My husband and I have gone through it. We've hurt from that in the past. And we've had to at times sit in front of people that we loved in private and say, we can't go with this plan because we know this isn't what God is asking of us. And that firm boundary is really hard for people in the Christian, in our faith, to sometimes respect and understand, because they sometimes can operate in the absolute, well, I'm the head, or I'm this, and that doesn't justify, overstepping what God is saying. Mm-hmm. And so we have to be really careful with that.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. That's something that I know a lot of people can relate to. Because at the end of the day, like, people end up getting burned out in ministry. And I know many people, and even myself, I went through that, of like overcommitting because I felt kind of guilty for setting that boundary for myself and being like, hey, I don't feel either comfortable with that. That's not what I really want to do, or that doesn't align with what I know that God wants me to do. Like, so many things in that. So can you give us some examples of boundaries, at least how they play out when you either set them, or, how that works?
Absolutely. So when I have a client come in, we obviously, when we're hitting the boundaries topic, we kind of sit down and I introduce them the 3 S's. And I feel like it's really simple and easy for them to remember. And so the first one is yourself, right? You're doing a self-evaluation. You're understanding your why. You're identifying what those unhealthy boundaries are, right? So to be able to put boundaries, you have to know what's unhealthy. And so just a few would be letting others direct your life, letting others describe your reality, letting others define you, people overwhelming you with their expectations automatically. Then we can, of course, go into the deeper ones where, a person physically invading your space without your permission, so you have to be able to identify, right, what is an unhealthy boundary in your life. And simultaneously, you're looking at your relationships, especially with family and friends, and even in work and church, right? And you're looking at, have I allowed certain things that I wouldn't normally allow because of guilt, or because of these expectations, or, culturally, I come from a Latin family, right? And so culturally, it's like family oriented. So this is what you're supposed to do, right? We hear that a lot. Well, this is what you're supposed to do because you're a Christian. This is what you're supposed to do because you're family. And that's actually an unhealthy expectation and boundary that people sometimes place on us. So once you identify it, it's shifting. Okay, what do I need? How do I begin to implement? So the shift includes that implementation. And it doesn't have to necessarily be like we say in Spanish, de cantazo. It doesn't have to be all quick and fast, right? Sometimes some areas, certain family members or dynamics might have to be gradual because they don't know boundaries. So hearing the word no can be very difficult. When you're setting boundaries, for example, if someone is yelling at you, back in the day, I'd start yelling back. Let's be real. Like, yes. I've done it. I've done it with family. I've done it with friends. I really messed up in that area because I didn't realize I could say, you can't continue to talk to me in that manner. And if you do, I'm either leaving the room or I'm going to ask you to leave, right? Mm. I would just, I become reactive. And so an example of a boundary is you don't have to go into the same level as they did. You can hold your ground, stay assertive, and then if they don't like it, well, then you're either leaving or they're leaving, depending on the dynamic of where you're at. You can also not feel like you have to give a yes right then. You know what? I tell people, I'm not one who likes to make a quick decision. Let me have some time to think about it and then I'll get back to you. Right? And that's putting a boundary. I'm not going to just say yes because you want to hear a yes right away. Mm. And so it's little things like that. That's just some examples of like the smaller ones. With family, a tough one is money. I'm sorry, I'm not going to lend you the money because when I have in the past, it's been misused. A firm boundary, and people don't like that, right? You're like, I'm family, you're supposed to. And the reality is it's okay to say no. And when we're able to get past the guilt or the unhealthy beliefs that we have about it, it's very freeing.
Yeah.
It's so freeing. Like my husband and I have really cultivated this over the last, I would say in the last 3, 4 years of our lives in our family dynamics and now, in ministry, but also, previous ministries that we've been a part of. It was okay for us to say no. It was okay for us, and it's okay for how we moved with our family, that it didn't have to look the way everyone expected, even if they've talked about us or labeled us. We
Hmm.
were okay with it because we knew we were doing what was best for our family. And so now, praise you, Jesus, we have, almost 16 years of marriage. And
Wow.
the last 4 years have probably been the best part of our marriage. Probably the last, I would say, since our daughter's birth, so 8, the, but really significantly the last 4.
So, was your family very invested in your relationship? Because something that you just mentioned was that over the past 4 years, the relationship with your husband has gotten a lot better. Can you share a little bit about that?
Absolutely. So I would say in the last 4 even to 5 years, and one of the very significant reasons is um, me being able to do my own personal work through counseling and identifying some of these very things that we're talking about: church hurt, boundaries, um, forgiveness not equaling reconciliation. And so our family, I wouldn't say they were 100% always invested in a relationship. I think in any Latin family, we can agree there's always these expectations, and then you layer on our Christian faith. And especially when you come from a family that has ministry, like my husband's family is in ministry and stuff, like was in ministry and stuff, it makes it very challenging. It makes it very challenging, my voice. At times I felt like I was losing my own identity to please others, and not just in our family, but also in church. And so once I got once I was able to really understand what boundaries, that I didn't need to be aggressive to have those boundaries, to have a voice, it really helped our marriage. And we were able to say, this is what's okay for us, and this is what's not okay,
Mm.
and it's at times hard. There were times that we didn't necessarily have a closeness to some family, but people grow, and when God is in it, you'll see that as people change and progress, we're able to reevaluate the boundaries we put and feel comfortable allowing some in, and seeing how that looks now.
No, I completely agree with what you just said, even about the in Latin families, like just being very in, that's, I don't know how to say how you're saying, like invested, but it's like more like entremetidos, maybe a little bit.
Girl, yes,
Like,
you can say
like all
it.
of that, like, or just having us trying to have a say in how the
Yeah,
family should be, like all those things. Like, so that's great to hear that you went through that work and you did your part to,
yeah,
establish that for you, because that was very difficult. And like it is for most people, because they either
yes,
feel like they don't know, or the people that they're trying to set the boundary with don't understand boundaries. And so you
yeah,
kind of feel like, am I being too rough? Like, am I, which
yeah,
you can end up losing. And something in the book that they say is always like,
yeah.
if the person doesn't respect that boundary that you have placed, it could mean that you might not continue that relationship.
Absolutely. I'll give you 2 examples, personal examples, right? So after you realize, like, I need to have these boundaries, you're shifting, right? That's the second part of it. You're shifting and you begin implementing. I remember my husband, his biological father, wasn't very present in his life. However, in the midst of a very private moment, my husband tried his best to extend an olive branch and try to bring peace. But then the ball is in that person's court to show that they're willing to really meet you, or be present, or show that growth as well. And unfortunately, it didn't happen. And so we were okay knowing, like, what he did in private, whereas people, if family wise, didn't necessarily understand that, and would put that layer of guilt of, well, your guys are your ministers, you should forgive. And what they didn't know was, in private, he had sought forgiveness, even though he was the child and never did anything. He did everything in private. And so when those things are said, you have to be okay with, like, no, it's okay with me not to have the relationship, because this is hurting me. This is hurting it's emotionally hurting me. It's hurting my family. And so even myself with my own mom, I had to do something similar. Because my mom suffers with severe mental illness, it got to a point that it was so toxic and dysfunctional. About a little less than a year and a half ago, I had to put a firm boundary that I couldn't do this because I have a child and I didn't want her to be exposed to this and feel like this was okay, that her mommy was being treated this way. And so, but in the process, I was like, I forgive you for this. And I also appreciate you for teaching me the type of mom that I don't want to be for my child, right? And I felt released from it. And did it hurt? Absolutely. The change of boundaries for anyone is going to hurt. It's going to be a little scary for us. You might feel like you even go into sometimes a little depression when those relationships are gone. And I did. Had to process those emotions in counseling. But then on the other side of it is this freedom of, I have my voice. I respect myself. I know who I am. I know who God wants me to be. And that is so much more freeing than the bondage that sometimes happens when we're like in these toxic, dysfunctional dynamics.
That's so true. Can you get into talking about when maybe a family member just doesn't like, so let's say they're always talking negatively about a certain family, right? And so, there's some certain people that you only see like twice a year, if that, in our
Yeah.
family, or like once if we have a chance to. So like with those kind of relationships, what is the dynamic when you want to be assertive, but you also kind of had to, I wouldn't say be a politician, but like you kind of had to like play the role in those scenarios? Like how would that work when you have boundaries?
I love that, the politician part, right? So we, again, being assertive doesn't mean that I have to be harsh. Like, I'm sorry, I can't talk to you, right? We can't do that. We can't always do that with that Thea that we haven't seen and all year. And we know that she wants, there's a little gossip or stuff that she wants to do or wants to talk negatively. So what you do is you check in. You can try to redirect the conversation. Oh, Thea, tell me how your life has been, or Thea, what's going on, or and try to redirect. If they continue, you can easily excuse yourself to say, oh, I need to go check on this. I need to do this. And a lot of times we do, especially those of us who are hosting or anything like that. But it's okay for you to say, you know what? It's okay for you there's some that you can even say, oh, let's not talk about that. This is a happy time. Let's enjoy this time together as a family. And we'll talk about that some other time. Or we don't even have to address that now, right? Just kind of shutting it down. Sometimes they go for it, sometimes they don't. So then you can remove yourself, right? It's always finding a way to remove yourself from that situation. And it doesn't have to be a whole show, because I think that's what happens a lot. We can really allow things to be super dramatic, and
Yeah.
it doesn't have to be a show.
Yeah, but it's like you have like you're in control of the situation. I feel like
That's right.
boundaries, if anything, like people think that that's something limiting, but actually that frees you, like how you said before, like that frees you to be like, this is me. Like I can remove myself. I don't have to be here if I don't want to be here. Like I'm not forced to say or do anything, because if that makes me feel uncomfortable, or I have already set that boundary with that person, I don't
Mm-hmm.
have to either show up or feel guilty for those things, because those are things that will or bring you peace, so even if that
Absolutely.
person doesn't understand. So that's kind of talking about like, for the holidays, they're coming up. So
Yes.
that's something that I feel like is relevant to even in my family, like just having those people that like you want to love and you do love and you've forgiven for whatever has happened in the past, but you just
Mm-hmm.
maybe don't want them so invested or involved in your life at to a certain extent. So what are other tips for boundaries during the holidays, like when it comes to family
Yes.
or other dynamics?
So one of the things that I was sharing even with some of my own clients was, typically holidays, festivities can go for hours. If there's something that is triggering there, that is triggering, you don't have to stay for hours. You're free to go when you're ready to go, right? And even if others don't understand, it's okay. So there have been times where hubby and I have been like, after 2 hours or after 3 hours, we're going to head out, and we're okay with that, right? And so I think that's one tip is you can limit the exposure that you have to that toxicity or any dysfunction. Not saying that every situation you go into is that. Sometimes it can start off great, right? The first 2 hours, everyone's happy, everyone's eating, everything is. And then sometimes, depending on the type of family dynamics, if there's alcohol involved or if there's certain things, dynamics can start to change. You're able to remove yourself from that dynamic. And then if there is really a severe case where maybe there has been somebody who has hurt you, an abuser or someone is going to be present, because unfortunately sometimes in families they do sweep those things under the rug. You have the right to say, I'm not going to attend because I know that's going to be a huge trigger for me and I'm still healing in that process. So there's multiple ways. It's just really self-reflecting and being like, okay, what do I need? Talking to yourself, what do I really need right now? And that is something that I think is a great tool. Sometimes it's underused, being able to really tell yourself, like, this is what I'm feeling and this is what I need.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's the best self-care, just taking care of what you need.
Yep.
I like what you said about either the timing, which is so important because sometimes parties can go a really
Hours.
long time. So that's really important that you could leave. You're not stuck there. Something else that I wanted to add or ask you was, how about with COVID? I know that some people don't feel comfortable being exposed to certain people or, for their own family health and all of that. How would they possibly establish those boundaries with their family?
That's such a great question. And so you have to go with, again, what you feel comfortable with as a family. For instance, we as a family wanted to get together for Thanksgiving, but in the beginning, I mean, we had masks, like we all walked in, we're wearing masks, and so whatever your level of comfort is, some people that's not enough. And so I know even with clients, we've had to walk through having to say, I don't feel comfortable joining this year, and being okay with that because of their own, maybe because I have some that have like autoimmune issues. And so being okay with that because it's for their own safety, or it's the safety of a loved one, our elderly family members who have been higher risk, especially because of, if they have any underlying health issues. So it's okay as a family to talk about it. And even if you guys aren't in agreement, it's okay to disagree, right? It's okay. Like, this is what my family's choosing to do, and I'm sorry you don't agree with that, but this is what our decision is for this year. It can be as simple as that. It doesn't have to be, this, a big dramatic thing, and they might be hurt, and that's okay. We don't want to take away people's feelings, right? They've got to process that. Holidays are really big, especially for, like, I know Latin-wise, it's a huge thing. Christmas, Dia de los Reyes, it's like a big thing for us. And so not having that, not being able to share it, can really bring up some emotions. And so just being able to just express, like, okay, this is what we've decided as a family, or what I've decided as an individual. I talk with them. I let them know if they're not okay. I can't get upset necessarily that they feel hurt or upset. I just have to understand and empathize. Like, I get it. You want to be with your family, so do I, but this is a decision I have to make.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's so good. What advice do you have for people that are either going through grief or feeling overwhelmed these holidays?
When we're feeling overwhelmed, one of the first things is I always check in to see what's your emotional support, right? Who are the people that are healthy supporters of your life, right? Who can give you that encouragement. That whether it's a counselor, whether it's a friend group, sometimes you're not close to your family, but you have an amazing friend group. And so when you're feeling overwhelmed, is there a person there that you feel like you can open up and it be a safe space to say that? Like, hey, I'm really struggling this holiday because I miss this, or I've noticed that. And that alone can sometimes be freeing, right? Or edifying to the soul, like being able to just say what you're feeling. When we're grieving, especially if there's grieving the loss of because of a death or loss because of a relationship ending, right? Because again, when we put some boundaries, sometimes relationships do end. I tell clients it's okay to feel that. It's okay to sit with that. Again, having that emotional support, making sure you're okay, because the stages of grief are not linear. And so where are you at? Do you have a good counselor? If you're in church, do you have a good rapport with your pastor, where maybe you can start with your pastor? And then the beauty of a lot of pastors now is they're connected to a lot of counselors, so they can refer you to someone who could specialize in helping you if the grief has to do with loss in any way, shape, or form. And so it's just finding balance. When we're feeling overwhelmed, we want to utilize some good coping skills, some good self-care, journaling, being able to just, like I said, have a great conversation with someone. If you have a counselor, processing that through counseling, and they'll have different approaches that could help as well.
Mm-hmm. Because I know that a lot of people don't know how to deal with feeling overwhelmed there, but your body kind of starts giving you signs. So like you're either having migraines, or you just feel anxiety, or you just can't sleep, or you're feeling sad, or you just feel like, there's different forms of the way that your body starts telling you that you feel overwhelmed. So if someone doesn't know how to deal with that, what is something that do you recommend? Like, is it writing it down? Because not everybody's, believe it or not, I've realized that not everybody's like a journaling kind of
That's
person.
true.
So what is another way to like kind of check with yourself to make sure it's like you're good?
Great question. So you're right. Not everyone is a journaling person. So one of the first things I tell everyone, because in the Christian faith, they forget that the word meditation is really learning to be still, right? And so they've given it a very bad connotation at times, but the word even says like meditate, right? And so you've got to learn to be still. And I always tell my clients, let's do a check-in. And so we do a body scan, starting from the top of our head to the soles of our feet. Like, what is going on? Where do I feel tension? Am I feeling emotions? And then when I'm feeling that, do I incorporate deep breathing, which so many things are free on YouTube? Deep breathing. Am I feeling sad? Is there someone that I can connect to and talk to? Whether it be a friend, a pastor, or a church leader you feel comfortable with, or a counselor. That's another tool. Another thing is changing your environment. Sometimes going out and getting that fresh air can be a huge tool, because sometimes you just need to break away from being in the four walls, especially those who are pretty much whole pandemic working from home, everything's from home, maybe even churches from home, right? So change of scenery, being able to get some fresh air, take a walk. And again, it's all about really hearing what's going on. But I always tell people you have to stop and really be still for a moment to understand what's going on inwardly before we can utilize any coping skills.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's very true. Because if you're not self-aware, like you just kind of try to figure it out on your own, and you're like, what is going on? Like, or it goes days on days, and then you either have like a mental breakdown or something like that's happening.
Exactly. So sometimes you have to stop yourself, because we live in a culture and a society that's very busy, right?
Mm-hmm.
Busy, 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 busy. And so I think also that's what we saw with COVID, where the busyness stopped and then people were unsettled and felt unsettled. And so then they were like, they started to feel things because they were forced to stop, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so you said some key things that for self-awareness, we're paying attention to, well, am I overthinking? Am I having irrational thoughts? Like, am I over catastrophizing everything? Am I having trouble sleeping, whether going to sleep or staying asleep? Do I feel irritable all the time, or a significant portion of time? Am I having trouble eating? Am I overeating, or am I undereating? So you can really just stop and just do a self-check, right? What is going on with me? What the tension, headaches, all those things. Your body when we're stressed, when we're overwhelmed, there's somatic things that will happen. People who struggle with anxiety, they'll start having stomach issues, and so we want to pay attention to those things, because from there, okay, what are the tools that I can use? Breathing, talking to someone. For those who like journaling. For those who don't mind taking a walk, getting fresh air, exercise. There's an array of things. So those are the first ones that come to my mind.
Yeah, that's very important. And so I want to go into a close, but can you repeat the 3 steps that you talked about,
Yes.
and just another tip for boundaries when it comes to establishing them?
Absolutely. So the 3 S's that I use, I know I talked about self and the shift, and then the third is the sustain, right? So self-evaluation, you're trying to understand the why and the what's causing this, why am I feeling this way, and evaluating your relationships, family, work, church, friendships, right? And then the shift, that's where we're implementing the boundaries, right? So we begin the shift by setting those boundaries, like making gradual changes, being able to speak assertively what we will and will not accept. And then, like you even mentioned earlier, at times having to end certain dynamics, maybe friendships or relationships that aren't honoring those boundaries. So that's the shift. And then sustaining, right? Sometimes we'll start something, but we don't finish it, right? Or we'll start something, but we're not consistent with it. So I'll be like, no, I'm not going to tolerate this anymore. But then 2 months from now, I start allowing it again.
Mm.
So it's the self, the shift, and the sustaining it. Is it okay in that time of when you're sustaining? Is it okay to reevaluate? Absolutely. Because we can never minimize the same way we grow, someone else can grow, and the relationship could repair, and then sometimes it doesn't, and that's okay. And so in that sustaining, you have space to reevaluate. Is there space for us to bring the family dynamic back together, or change, or allow someone that maybe before I didn't have in my life now back in my life? I've done it personally. I've seen a friend, we had a falling out, and then now, we're closer than ever. And so it's because there had to be a growth on both parts, right? So those are the 3 S's that, it's always great for us. And then when it comes to boundaries, not being afraid to say what you need is going to be the key. Not being afraid to say what you need, because others do it. And so it should be okay for us too.
Yeah, it's having like a voice.
Yep.
Something that for me growing up, I feel like I lost my voice in that
Mm-hmm.
because of some boundaries that were crossed that I kind of didn't get to understand that I could be, say no to things. So I was like the yes person. If anything, I feel like I was a people pleaser, for most of my life, until I finally, went to counseling. I realized like, oh wow, I'm doing it. Like I'm really like, I really end up kind of like taking on what people like just want to throw at me, or like even though I feel uncomfortable with it, which is insane to me, because it's like, how have I allowed myself to kind of lose myself in the midst of trying to please others, but other people have no remorse to tell you or to do what they want to do for themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So I completely agree with that. I think that that is the most important thing, and sticking it out. So sustaining, um, how would you say, what's like the hardest part about sustaining? Because when people are trying to sustain their boundaries, and people kind of either question you on it, or are like, really, like you're really trying to be like that. What's one tip that you give to someone when they're trying to stick their ground? And because at least for me personally, I feel like I've always tried to be a nice person, because I feel like I genuinely am more kind. Nice is like a word, but like kind, like being kind hearted. People can sometimes take advantage of that. And so how can that play out in when it comes to sustaining in boundaries?
So for instance, when there is someone else, right, whether it's a family member or a friend, because we sometimes see this in friendships, right? Um, Unrealistic expectations. Well, this is what you're supposed to do. You're my best friend, right? And so, no, no, I'm not. And then when I'm feeling it, because sometimes what happens is sustaining it is you want to revert back, because sometimes there is manipulation in it, right? So we have to understand what that looks like, depending on the person. And we have to be able to identify that manipulation. And then we also have to identify our feelings. Like, am I feeling guilt? Am I slipping back into needing validation or seeking approval from someone? And if so, then you have an opportunity to, like GPS, redirect, reroute, right? Go back. So, I always tell people, give yourself grace, because we don't we don't get it perfect. I've made so many mistakes along the way. Now, especially now, is where I feel like I truly understand it. But the sustaining took time, and sometimes it's trial and error. And sometimes I think even in my field, they don't acknowledge. Sometimes we won't acknowledge that. You don't always get it right the first time in the boundaries, but you'll find your rhythm, and when you do, you'll know, and it feels really good.
Yeah, definitely. Because then you're like, wow, I am taking my power back. Like that's like a power dynamic too of like your own voice. So honestly, I learned so much through what you shared. Is there anything else that you want to leave the listeners with?
The biggest thing I want to say is, if you feel afraid, if you're feeling like you're not sure if there's boundary issues in your life, like unhealthy boundaries, talk to a professional. It's okay to talk to a counselor, just to identify, hey, these are the areas that I'm noticing. Is this unhealthy for me? Because sometimes it's learning to have that self-awareness. So don't be afraid to ask for help, or ask someone who can guide you and show you, or not show you, because a lot of times in counseling, we're allowing you to kind of show us. And
Mm.
so we kind of work together in that process. And so don't be afraid to ask for help, even if, culturally we're taught like the family business is the family business. It's okay to talk to someone. It's okay to really evaluate those relationships, and then just know that you're not alone. There are people out there that want to really help you through these changes.
Yeah, that's so true. I really loved our conversation. And honestly, that's one of the best recommendations for the book, Boundaries by Henry Cloud.
Yes.
And is there any other resources that you offer for other people that want to learn more about boundaries?
Well, Boundaries has its whole series, right? He has a whole series on boundaries, boundaries in marriage, boundaries with children. When I'm working with a client, then we go in an individual level of what other resources, because sometimes the boundaries come from something else. The lack of boundaries will come from something else, some attachment stuff, right? I didn't have the affection or nurture that I needed growing up, or the expectations. There were certain things, parental styles that might trigger some attachment issues. And so alongside the boundaries, we begin to talk on attachments. And that influences as well our relationships. But that's a whole nother topic, girl. That's like a whole nother podcast.
Yes.
Right? And so, so really, if we're looking to start with boundaries, that's a great book. And then, of course, I always tell everyone, Dr. Henry Cloud has a podcast. Good mental health podcasts are out there, like this one.
Thank you.
So there's definitely a lot of resources. There's a lot of resources, but I would say, don't overwhelm yourself. Start with one. So if you start with boundaries and it intrigues you and you want to go deeper, meet with a counselor, and then the resources that you utilize can really be more personalized,
Mhm.
right? Because what my issues were might not be the same that you've gone through, but then there's resources that build upon even the boundaries, because there's codependency, there's attachment. And so here's the boundary book, but even there's a book that I love reading, Facing Codependency. It's by Mellody. She actually has a portion in her book about boundaries,
Mm.
right? So that's another great read. And so just things like that. But once you know there's a boundary issue, talk talk to a professional. They'll help you
Yes. I
with the
mean,
resources.
if someone wanted to contact you, what's the best way? Is it through email? Is it through social media? What is the best way that someone can reach out to you?
Well, I'm in Orlando, and so you can reach me at my office. I have an amazing admin team that answers our calls for us. And so that number is 321-701-3064. I am on social media. You can find me on social media by my name, Suely Rivera. I'm on Facebook and Instagram. I'll be working in the new year, of course, on all my own personal business page and stuff like that. But right now it's just I work under Broken Wings, which is a great Christian nonprofit organization of counselors. And so we work together in different areas. So if it's not a fit for me, I definitely can refer you to some amazing team members.
I really appreciate this conversation. I know that a lot of our listeners are going to take away, especially for the holidays, moving forward on boundaries. And so thank you so much for being a part. Thank you for joining me on today's episode. I really hope that you learned something new today or you got something out of today's episode. As I was editing this, I went back and made some notes about the 3 S's, which she talked about: self, shift, and sustaining. And I just feel like all of this is something that you can always reevaluate your boundaries, see what's going on in your life, and seeing what relationships are maybe unhealthy or what dynamics you have that are not so good for your mental health or for you as an individual, and just finding your voice and having your voice. And that's so important. So as always, thank you so much for tuning in. And if you haven't, please do a review for me. It'll take you like 10 seconds to do. If you're on Apple Podcasts, you can just scroll down. That really just helps me know what you're loving, and especially if you got something out of today's episode or other episodes, let me know. And you can always also email me at beautymarkspodcast@gmail.com, and make sure to follow me at Elizabeth Sabby. And it is Monday, so I hope you guys have a great week, and I will see you guys in the next episode.